Hi all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ivana. I like to read, and today I'm sharing with you my favorite books of 2023. Now, 2023 was a special year for me because it was the year that I started booktube, and if you recall, if you've watched my booktube newbie tag, you'll see that one of the reasons why I wanted to start this booktube channel was to kind of figure out what my tastes were. At the start of 2023, I kind of felt like I was going through something called reading puberty and trying to see, what are my tastes? What do I like? I am happy to share that after a year on booktube, I think I've kind of figured out my taste. We're gonna get started with my favorite authors of 2023. These are authors that I read multiple books from and that I found two or more books of theirs to be my favorite. So we're gonna start with none other than Miss Jamaica Kincaid. And Jamaica Kincaid is a 74-year-old author as of right now. She is Antiguan United Statesian. I believe she lives in the United States right now, but she's originally from Antigua. And she's a legend. She writes about colonialism, she writes about power, race, class, mother-daughter dynamics. A lot of her protagonists in her fiction works are adolescent girls. And I just like the way that she explores topics like sexuality and power dynamics. Her writing is a type of writing that is simple but also packs a punch and is just so sharp. And one of my favorite books by her this year is Lucy. I'm in the process of turning this room into like a library room, and I for the life of me cannot find my copy of Lucy. I am so upset about it. I spent all morning trying to find it, and I'm sure it'll turn up, but I basically underlined at least one line in every page of Lucy, and Lucy is a very slim novel. Now, I've talked about Lucy and I've talked about all of these books before in my wrap-ups, but essentially to give you a little recap, Lucy is about a 19-year-old Antiguan girl who moves to New York City to become a nanny, to find brighter horizons, to give herself a better life. This book is set, I believe, in the 90s. Lucy is just such an astute narrator. Her observations about everything from the weather to like race to trying to find yourself through an education, and her writing about her fraught relationship with her mother is just so strong. It's so funny. She's so weird. She is figuring out her sexuality, and it was just such a good book. I feel like I want to do a deep dive into a lot of my favorite authors, and Jamaica Kincaid, I just want to read more interviews about her because the more I read her books, the more I get curious about how her life influenced her work. I want to give you a little snippet of Jamaica Kincaid's writing, and I don't have the book with me, like I said, so I'm going to read a quote that I wrote down. Lucy says, "I had come to feel that my mother's love for me was designed solely to make me into an echo of her. And I didn't know why, but I felt that I would rather be dead than become just an echo of someone." She talks about her relationship with her mom as like the first like failed love story of hers, and it's just so heartbreaking but also so empowering to hear her like try to find her way. The way that she talks about her struggles and reflects on her struggles is so nuanced that Lucy very much feels like a real person. And another quote that I loved was, "Isn't it the most blissful thing in the world to be away from everything you have ever known? To be so far away that you don't even know yourself anymore and you're not sure you ever want to come to all of the things you're a part of." Jamaica Kincaid is just such an inspirational writer for me and someone that I like truly admire, and I cannot wait to read more of her in the coming years. My next favorite author will come as no surprise because I read 4 of her books this year and I adored 3 of them. And it is Ernaux, winner of the 2022 Nobel Prize in Literature. I don't think I can put into words how much I love Ernaux. She is currently alive. I believe she is 84 years old as of right now, and she is the first French woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. I've never been one to keep up with awards, but she totally deserves this Nobel Prize. What I love about Ernaux is that she writes with such candor. She breaks taboo and she just writes about everyday life. She writes about having affairs. She writes about getting an abortion. She writes about being jealous. She writes about getting a divorce. She's so introspective, and that's where she really shines. And she also writes in a really matter-of-fact way, so there's not a lot of like purple prose here. Every sentence has a reason, and the sentences are not flowery. They're very matter-of-fact, but they still pack a punch. And she's like not worried about making herself look bad. Like, she writes about jealousy. This is The Possession. I keep pulling it up and I haven't talked about it. I work at the library tutoring once a week, and I had a really slow day one time and I just picked this up. It was in like the recent acquisitions, and I could not put this down, and I read the whole thing I think in like 45 minutes because her books tend to be slim. Some of them or longer. It's all about jealousy, and the book starts out with an X-rated scene that I can't really talk about. She writes really candidly about sex and how sex with her ex-lover, just her whole life revolved around it. And this book is all about her breaking up with this man and just becoming possessed with this idea that he's with someone else, and with this idea that she should be with him instead. But does she really just want to be with him? Like, why is she holding on to this idea? Prior to this year, I always reached for books so I could learn something from them. And I'm not saying that I can't learn from this, but what I love about Ernaux's writing and about Ernaux's stories is that there isn't always a lesson, and there doesn't always have to be a lesson. It's just her sharing her feelings and her emotions, and doing so in a sociological way and in a really precise way. Like, she's just recalling her state of mind when she truly felt like she lost her mind, and she's not worried about being ugly. And I love that, because how many of us have had such horrible thoughts? Her writing is so human, and it tells you a lot about like the human experience, especially for women and femmes, that is just so uncanny. And a line that captures kind of what this book, The Possession, is about is, the strangest thing about jealousy is that it can populate an entire city, the whole world, with a person you may never have met. So that's Annie Ernaux. The third author I want to talk about is Lucy Maud Montgomery, or L.M. Montgomery, who was a Canadian author who was born in 1874 in Prince Edward Island, Canada, and who is best known for Anne of Green Gables. Now, if you had told me that one of my favorite new authors was gonna be a woman who wrote classics, I'd be like, what? But here we are. And a book I want to talk about that she wrote that is one of my favorites is The Blue Castle. And this book is so sweet. It is a love story. It is a romance. What I love about L.M. Montgomery is the fact that her writing is just so delightful and sweet, and also very punchy and all about women. I also love her nature writing. I think that L.M. Montgomery writes really beautiful prose and not just about people. She has really good dialogue in her books that it's really, really funny, but she also writes settings really well. And I mean, of course, she like lived in Prince Edward Island, and Prince Edward Island is so beautiful. This one was just such a treat and such a surprise for me. It's about a woman named Valancy Sterling, who is considered to be an old maid. She is 29 and unmarried, and she lives with her mom and her cousin. Her cousin is a widow. Her family just makes her life miserable. Like, she is just supposed to be serving other people. She's never allowed to do anything that she wants to do, and she keeps getting these flutters in her heart, and she's just like, I'm gonna go to the doctor and figure out what the heck is wrong with me. And she receives a devastating diagnosis that like kind of sets the stage for her to just blow up her life. I don't know about you, but I like books about people blowing up their lives, and this isn't a terminal illness book despite the synopsis, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's so much more than that. It is about being adventurous, defying expectations, being in nature and enjoying the woods and the seasons, and loving cats and loving people. I just feel like the way that L.M. Montgomery writes people makes them seem so real. This might have been written in the 20s, but I definitely have family members that kind of remind me of her family members, and I know people just like the characters in this story. And so it's just a very swoony, romantic, nature-y book that is a really good pick-me-up if you ever need it. I feel like both of the books that I've read by L.M. Montgomery are like that. And I wanted to read you a little nature passage, but I'm not going to because they're really long, but they're also really beautiful. I really wonder if Mary Oliver was at all a fan of L.M. Montgomery, because like I said, the way that she describes nature and like the woods here is just phenomenal, and I cannot recommend this one enough. L.M. Montgomery is a new fave, and I also want to do a deep dive into her. So moving on to other favorites, we are going to talk about my favorite books by Irish women. I have 3, and the first one of these is none other than The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. I feel like I just talked a lot about backlist books, but this book was actually published in 2023, and it is a book that I took my chance on because I loved the premise and I also loved the cover. I normally don't buy hardcover books, and when I do buy them, I will actually annotate them with pencil, because if I don't like them, I can just erase the pencil and sell them. I've done this before and I'm not ashamed, and that is a pro tip if you are wary of buying books by debut authors or by authors that you haven't read prior and you just want to give it a chance, but the library holds are out of control. Caroline O'Donoghue is actually not a debut author, but this was the first adult book of hers that was published in the United States. This year I have read 4 of her books. 3 of them were a YA trilogy about tarot. That wasn't a favorite, but still was very funny and enjoyable enjoyable. This one was absolutely a favorite. This book is about a girl named Rachel, and it's told in alternating timelines. Rachel lives in Cork and she's trying to get her degree. So we see her in college, and we also see her as a professional in like her 30s, I believe. And she is kind of reminiscing about her adolescence and all of the shenanigans that she got up to when she was in college. Now, I don't know if it is because Caroline O'Donoghue and I are contemporaries. I believe we're the same age. This book gave me a feeling of nostalgia. It just reminded me of significant friendships that I made coming of age and making stupid decisions. Rachel becomes really close to this dude named James, and he may or may not be gay, but she's like in love with him in a platonic way, and they work at a bookstore. And Rachel finds out that this college professor that she has a crush on has a new book coming out, and she tries to convince James and the bookstore owners to hold a signing for this professor's book so she can seduce him. And so it's a little bit wacky, it's a little bit crazy, it's really funny. Every other page I was writing LOL, LOL, and like actually laughing out loud. And it just reminds me of like codependence, feeling lost, falling in love. I don't want to give too much away because something really huge happens like 30 pages in that is not in the synopsis. So I'm gonna leave it at that, but I just love me some good old Irish humor. And even though one of Rachel's dreams is to leave Cork, I just love like the sense of place here, and it was just a really fun time. One of the things I want to do next year is to take more notes on my reading, and I want to do it through Storygraph this year. I think I've toyed around with the idea of doing a commonplace notebook, but I feel like I'm already tracking my reading through Storygraph, and there's a journal feature there. I don't remember much about this book. I read it over the summer and I just remember really enjoying it. I want to reread this, as well as all the other books that I said were favorites. I think that that's a good way for me to figure out what is a favorite, is which books do I think I want to read again. The next Irish novel makes me feel so basic, and I also lost it. It is somewhere in this pile of books, or maybe it's under my bed, who knows. Hopefully I'll find it soon. But it is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I was really lucky that I got the UK version at the Harvard bookstore. It was used because I think that cover is so beautiful. And this book just, Connell and Marianne just break my heart. I just love books about growing up and growing into yourself, and what can I say that hasn't already been said about Normal People? I know that a lot of people dislike the miscommunication trope. I think that a lot of relationships fail because of miscommunication, and I think it's about how you handle that miscommunication and prevent it that makes something better. I just love books that tug at your heartstrings and that remind you of the person that you used to be, and that ask you to kind of forgive yourself for all of the behavior that you have been a part of. And I just think that Normal People does that really well. The interactions between Connell and Marianne were so tender, and I don't know how much of me loving this book was due to me also loving the Hulu adaptation, which I've watched like twice now, but it is a book that I cherish. It is a book that I want to revisit, however cringy it may be, because it just really spoke to me. And the last angsty Irish book that I consider a favorite of 2023 was Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. Now, this one is considered a favorite, but this is certainly not one that I would want to revisit because it put me in a dark place. And I actually don't even own the book. And I mentioned I read this one when I went on the reading retreat with the cats. And one thing I mentioned was that at the start of the book, I was like, I really love this. I'm tabbing everything. I want to buy this book. And then halfway into the book, I was like, get me out of here. This feels too real. I see myself in this book too much. Like, I'm so glad that once I finish this book, I can just close it and like return it to the library, and it is out of my hands and I don't have to think about it, because it really crawled under my skin. And it's about a young woman who is in a toxic relationship. She is very toxic herself, and it is about just like the mental gymnastics that you will go to try to stay in a relationship that is doomed. Very heavy on the trigger warnings. Check those out if you're interested in it. It's just a really ugly book that feels very real and raw, and it's not a book I would necessarily recommend to anyone, but it just felt really real and relatable. I don't know what that tells you about me. Don't judge me. I'm not the only one who loves it. I would be lying if I said that it didn't deeply move me, because it did. Okay, so next up we're going to talk about favorite books in terms of subgenres, and one of the subgenres that I really got into that kind of felt very palate cleansy and that got me through the books that were a little bit more difficult were campus novels. And one of my favorite campus novels this year was Old Enough by Haley Jacobson. In my mid-year bookish freakout tag, I said that this was one of my favorite books of the year. I thought that I spoke prematurely, but that is not the case. I actually really love this one. I still think that it is one of my favorite books of the year. And this is sold as like a Gen Z campus novel. For people who are trying to graduate out of YA, which I think I fit that boat last year, Old Enough and campus novels in general are like a good bridge to adult reads, and this one is just so honest and tender, and it's all about growing up. It follows a girl named Sav who goes to college, who's had like a bisexual awakening and is making new friends. It's all about found family. She gets a phone call from her best friend from high school, I believe her sophomore year of college, and her best friend is like, hey, I'm getting married, and she's like, what the heck, like, we're really young, but sure, like, congratulations. And then she goes back home and she's expected to participate in all the wedding festivities for her friend. But it turns out that Sav and her best friend's brother, who is older, have a complicated relationship. And when she goes back home, she's reminded of a lot of horrible things. And so this book is about growing up, realizing that who you were when you were younger and growing up in your hometown is very different than the person that you currently are. It's about outgrowing old friendships that were mostly out of convenience and learning to stick up for yourself and forgiving yourself for maybe not making the best choices. I feel like we're sensing a trend here in the types of books that I like, but I love it. I thought this book was also brilliantly funny. I also bought this took a chance because I saw a lot of hype on TikTok, and I don't regret buying this one bit. I'm really happy that I own it and I want to reread it. But yeah, this book, like Normal People, like Acts of Desperation, like The Rachel Incident, can be really cringy, and I still love that. I love books that are real. I love characters that are lovable and characters that mess up, and I love mess, so this was a win for me. Another subgenre that I am really curious about, and another favorite that I didn't know was a favorite until I really thought about it, was The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This book is a short story collection. It is from the 80s, I believe, and it is feminist fairy tale retellings. I don't know what it is about me lately, but I have been really into fairy tales, and I just thought that this was so dark, so creepy, so lyrical, and sharp and sensual that it just really left such a big impression on me, and I really want to read more of Angela Carter's work. This was grotesque. It really pushed boundaries. A lot of very mature themes on here, but I still managed to enjoy it so much. I always say that I'm not a fantasy or like a horror reader, but I do have a dark side, and I think that this really scratched that itch. Another book that captures a subgenre that I am now into is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Anne of Green Gables is a book that I never thought that I would read. I've had my library copy for months and months and months, even though I bought my own. I got a box set of the first 4 Anne of Green Gables books because this is a series. And I have to transfer my tabs. If you've been living under a rock like I had been, Anne of Green Gables is about a redheaded girl who's an orphan who gets adopted by a couple of siblings who are older and need someone to help with the farm. They were hoping for a boy, but Anne was accidentally sent to them. She is the original manic pixie dream girl. She is really annoying. She won't shut up, and in spite of everything, she's super lovable, and she's one of my favorite characters ever now. This book is kind of like serialized. Every chapter feels like an episode of a TV show, and I actually love the adaptation on Netflix, and with an E. It's really, really sweet and like also like very queer and progressive. There are some beautiful one-liners here, and just faces the world with so much wonder and excitement, and it just makes you want to go back to that feeling of being a kid and seeing things for the first time and experiencing the world and all it has to offer. This also, like The Blue Castle, has really beautiful nature writing. She talks a lot about how wonderful it is to live in a world where there are Octobers. It feels very autumnal. She talks a lot about kindred spirits and friendships, and she says things like, would you like to be a gull? I think I would. That is, if I couldn't be a human girl. Don't you think it would be nice to wake up at sunrise and swoop down over the water and away out over that lovely blue all day, then at night fly back to one's nest? It's just so precious. And so yeah, so I forgot to say that this is related to classics by women. So this is a subgenre that I am also really curious about. I want to read more classics that are written by women. I feel like I haven't been giving them a chance. now we're gonna talk about my nonfiction faves, and I have it split up into two categories. The first category is creative nonfiction that reads like journalism, and I had to like double check that Cristina Rivera Garza wasn't a journalist because she's not. She actually writes literary fiction. But Liliana's Invincible Summer, or El Invencible Verano de Liliana, is hands down one of my favorite nonfiction books that I read this year. I'm so happy that I managed to read this one in Spanish while I was in Mexico City. It felt like fate, and it is all about how Cristina Rivera Garza's sister Liliana was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. This book is made up of letters from Liliana and her friends, journal entries, reflections from the author herself, and you get to see a picture of just what kind of person Liliana was. I believe this won the National Book Award in English for nonfiction, if I'm not mistaken, or it was a finalist. I can't begin to tell you just how beautifully this is written because Liliana was an amazing writer herself. She was such a sweet soul, and she was just a girl trying to figure herself out. She wanted to be an architect, but damn, she could have been a writer if she wanted to. She expressed herself so well. This is in essence a true crime book, and I think that true crime has gotten a bad rep lately because a lot of it can be exploitative, but Rivera Garza does such a good job of like honoring her sister's life and also creating tension, and it really felt like a thriller. I was scared reading this book, but it didn't feel trashy. It just felt really eerie how something like that could happen, and she really leaves you in suspense as to like how Liliana was murdered up until the very end. Before Liliana got murdered, she wrote in her journal too, so it's just very up. Like I don't know how else to express it. This book is just, it's a love letter to a sister. It also provides commentary on femicide and how freaking common it happens to be, not just in Mexico but all over the world. It's truly a call to action. This book is powerful. I feel like I haven't read anything like it, and I can't wait to see what else Cristina Rivera Garza has to offer. The other book that is a favorite that also kind of reads like journalism because it is written by an actual journalist is What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma by Stephanie Fu. And this is a deeply personal memoir. I read this in January of last year, and it has just stayed with me since then. Stephanie Fu is an NPR journalist who is such a compelling storyteller. She was abandoned by her family when she was younger, and she talks about how she suffers from complex trauma, and unlike PTSD, where it's just often a single event that traumatizes someone, complex trauma is all about how you experience constant severe abuse for a prolonged period of time. And she talks about how going through all of that, being abandoned, being mistreated, suffering so much growing up, how that has impacted her interpersonal relationships to this day, and how she can go about healing. Sometimes when I read memoirs, it can feel really uncomfortable because it can feel like someone is just trauma dumping on you. This book is written in such a compelling way, and it has a purpose. She is so honest about all of the horrible, like, toxic things that she's done as a result of her own trauma. And she, at the start of the book, is like super fed up because her therapist is like, yo, like, you have complex trauma. And she goes, wow, oh my God, thank you for naming it. Finally, like, I have some answers. When did you find this out? And the therapist was like, oh, I knew it from a long time ago. And she's like, well, I'm breaking up with you as a therapist. Like, why would you not tell me the name of my diagnosis? And so she tries to find different therapeutic methods to heal herself, and she finds something that works that unfortunately is not accessible to everyone because it involves transcribing things. You get to see how she is able to figure out the ways in which her coping mechanisms have obviously like allowed her to survive, but have also like really harmed her and other people around her. She's able to name strategies that have helped her heal in like a way that doesn't harm others or herself. She also goes back to her hometown and researches how mental health issues are swept under the rug in Asian communities. She is Asian herself, so there's also like investigative journalism aspect to it. She's not just investigating herself, but also the people she grew up with and the community that she belonged to. I think anyone who is trying to heal can really benefit from this book. I actually got this from the library and then I bought it because it made such an impact on me. I cannot even begin to tell you. And I actually didn't listen to this on audio. She reads her own audiobook, and apparently she's a really compelling speaker. So I am dying to reread this. Words can't express how powerful this book is. My My final two books are also nonfiction, but these are written in second person. First one is Heavy, an American Memoir by Kiese Layman. This book is written as a letter to Kiese Layman's mom, who wasn't a perfect mother, but whom he loves very dearly. This book has to do with Black masculinity, it has to do with trauma, it has to do with addiction. It's a really, as the title suggests, heavy book that is full of so many truths and so many heartbreaks. This might be like the most honest, and I don't know, I can't put into words just how freaking layered and difficult to read this book was. It is a book that is, again, heavy on the trigger warnings. It's about the power of books, the power of rereading, the power of getting an education, and the importance of writing and how that can also help you get through the tough times in life. I can't, there's no way that I can properly review this, but read it if you haven't. It was published in 2018, so you probably have. And then the last favorite book that I have that is also nonfiction, that is written in second person, is A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid. So this book is a scathing letter to all of the white tourists who come to Antigua to vacation, and she talks a lot about the history of Antigua and how being a tourist is really an ugly thing, and how you expect people from this country to wait on you. She talks about when you come from a country that is colonized, a lot of the times you're living in poverty, you haven't really been able to think beyond your day-to-day. You might not have the tools to fully criticize your oppressors. She's just so sharp. She says, the thing you have always suspected about yourself the minute you become a tourist is true. A tourist is an ugly human being. An ugly thing. That is what you are when you become a tourist. An ugly, empty thing, a stupid thing, a piece of rubbish, passing here and there to gaze and taste that. And it will never occur to you that the people who inhabit the place in which you have just paused cannot stand you. So it's just like a very passionate and well-researched look into the horrors of tourism and colonialism and criticisms of capitalism. It's just such a good little book. I've always felt icky about beach vacations, and I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and it just makes so much sense. And I love it. I just think she's so funny, but also poetic, but also very matter-of-fact. I love Jamaica Kincaid. So that's it. These are my favorite books of 2023. I had such a great reading year, and I hope that you did too. What are your favorite books of 2023? What is one that I should absolutely read? Or which one have you added to your list? I hope that you're doing well. Peace.